It's getting darker, which will help the movie. Let's just all the curtains over there. So I'd just like to say to everybody a very, very warm welcome. My name is Gillian Tett. I'm the Provost of King's College in Cambridge, which means that I oversee this college here. In American English, Provost means you're in charge of the academic education. In much of the British society, Provost means that you're in charge of religion. I'm actually in charge of neither. I simply oversee the college and the students that we have here, which is an enormous privilege and delight, not least because I have a chance to organise events like this. The reason why I'm so particularly delighted to be doing this today is that I've spent the last 30 years as a journalist with the Financial Times. I ran the American operations, I was editor for many years, and so I have followed the story of Afghanistan and Central Asia in the news for many, many years as a journalist, and the tragedies that have engulfed the countries I know very well. However, before I became a journalist, I actually did a PhD at Cambridge University in cultural anthropology in Central Asian studies, and in particular, I focused on Tajikistan, where I spent a couple of years of my life studying in Tajikistan, looking at the cultural history and the anthropology of Tajikistan. Some of you may have met Munira Shahidi and the Shahidi family in the summer at other events, and they were part of the group that very kindly welcomed me to Tajikistan. So I have a passionate interest in the region and a passionate desire to see peace break out across the area, and above all else to learn the lessons from the region, both negative but also positive. And I think it's the positive lessons that we're really focusing on today in terms of the remarkable legacy of Osimi and the degree to which he fought so strongly to uphold a vision of collaboration and unity, and in many ways the spirit of the Silk Roads, which has shaped so much of the area. We are very lucky at King's to have a Silk Roads project and platform, which has a number of scholars which are looking at different aspects of the Silk Roads. And the reason I love the Silk Roads, and the reason why I think the spirit of Osimi upholds these values so strongly, is that in an era when we're grappling with rising protectionism, geopolitical conflict, political polarization, and all manner of nasty aspects of the human nature, I like to look back at the Silk Roads as an example of globalization in a positive way. The Silk Roads is all about a story of different groups trading with each other, traveling vast distances, swapping silk, swapping spices, but most importantly, swapping ideas and culture and creativity for the good of everyone. The story really is about collisions and the fact that we all become far more creative and innovative when we actually collide with different cultures and try and work together and blend the best of them rather than fight. I think there's a message we need desperately badly today in many, many areas of the world, starting, I should say, with America. But what Osimi did with his remarkable legacy was really try and fight for those values which are all about what I like to think of as Silk Road values. So given that we have the Silk Roads here project in King's, it's doubly wonderful to be hosting this remarkable project. And I'm going to hand over now to Laurie Bristow. So Laurie Bristow, who is an amazing person. He heads up another college like me, but he was previously ambassador for many, many years. He was ambassador in Moscow. He was also, though, the last British ambassador to Afghanistan. He volunteered, knowing full well the dangers that were unfolding there, to essentially help manage the transition, and was there during the last year, I believe, or 6 months. So he's got a remarkably good perspective on events and the whole story about Osimi in Afghanistan. So I'll hand over to him to say a few words.
Thanks very much, Gillian. Thanks very much for the introduction and also for the invitation today. This was billed to me by Zalmai as a keynote speech. It's not quite going to be a keynote. But what I did think I would do is just say a few words about my experience of the region, or the regions intersecting with each other, from the perspective of a practitioner, as a diplomat working on foreign policy. The time, as well as the geography, is important in that respect. So, I joined the Foreign Office in 1990. That date is important for reasons I think everybody in the room will understand. I left it in 2022. Also a very, very important date in terms of the unfulfilled expectations of how the Cold War ended and what happened afterwards. But just to start with a more personal note. So one of my jobs in London was the rather grandly titled Director for Eastern Europe and Central Asia, which was a kind of compromise title for a directorate, which we couldn't quite decide how to talk about it. Was it the former Soviet Union? Well, it doesn't really work in the 20 teens. Is it Eurasia? Most definitely not, because of the ideological dimensions of that, particularly when dealing with Russia. So what actually is it? And in the end, we just decided to describe it geographically. But when I was doing that job, I could make a fairly safe assumption, actually two fairly safe assumptions. In any really senior meeting around Whitehall in government, I was probably the only person in the room who'd ever actually been to Russia or spoke Russian. Even more worryingly, I was probably the only person I knew who'd ever been to Tajikistan. And then I met Gillian.
Exactly, sorry about that. You need to blow your stories there.
Yeah. So not only has she actually been to Tajikistan, I got sort of flown in and flown out again on official visits, but she'd actually spent time there working in the country, studying its culture and people, and of course its customs. Maybe just to come back to what the region means for a diplomat of my generation. It's actually seen through quite a restricted prism. So we were very certainly interested in the consequences across the former Soviet Union of how and why the Soviet Union fell to pieces. If I describe to you the level of staffing that I had working on Russia compared to the number of staff, precisely 1.5, that I had working on the whole of the Central Asia region, it's telling you. So, the reason for that, of course, is we'd spent 40 years in an extreme and sometimes very, very dangerous ideological confrontation with the Soviet Union that had come to an end, and we didn't really quite know what to make of the world after that. We were interested to a degree in the emerging economic, maybe geopolitical competition cooperation between Russia and China in the region, and what that told us about relations between those two great powers. We were certainly interested in a limited number of very, very high priority political and global political security issues. So I'll highlight 4. They won't be a surprise to anyone. Afghanistan. After 9/11, the world changed. The transit routes into and out of Afghanistan during and after the US-led intervention were of fundamental importance to what we were trying to achieve there. We had literally maps on the walls of our offices, the air bases, the railways, the roads, things like that. When I was the director that I described earlier on, I once visited all 5 Central Asian countries in one quite tough week with the Defense Secretary. The sole purpose of that visit was to enhance our access to the supply routes into and more to the point out of Afghanistan, because that was the period when we were preparing for the end of NATO combat operations in Afghanistan. We had to get a large part of the British Army out of Afghanistan, and there are basically only 2 ways in and out. The other is Pakistan. If we're talking about Afghanistan, we're also talking about Pakistan in particular, but also Iran. How do they see their political and security interests being engaged, particularly when you've got maybe 130,000 US-led foreign forces right next door? What do they intend to do to protect those interests? And of course, in a more distant way, we're also talking about India because of the geopolitical competition between India and Pakistan. We're talking about China, and we're talking about Russia, and about how they see developments in Afghanistan and what we're trying to do there. A bit more on Iran. For much of my time as a diplomat, I'm not an Iran specialist, but clearly because of some of the subjects I worked on, you do need to follow what's going on there. Iran was, and I think still is, seen as primarily at the center of a web of critically important but very, very difficult global and regional security problems, really big ones, like constraining Iran's nuclear weapons ambitions, limiting the regime's ability to destabilize the wider region through military proxies, but also reducing the risks of confrontation, not only with Israel, but also with the Arab world and potentially Turkey. So I was also ambassador in Azerbaijan. That was a junior ambassador job 20 years ago. I was there when all of the big oil and gas infrastructure was built out in the Caspian and the big pipelines out to the west. So for us at that stage, a very, very big part of the story of the broader region was energy security, global energy security. How do you bring more resources to market, resources that are not controlled either by the Gulf monarchies or by Russia? That was a very, very important part of the story. And of course, that story continues. I still await the day when very large quantities of gas cross the Caspian from Turkmenistan, but that's been a discussion that's been going on for the best part of 3 decades. And finally, of course, Turkey. I was based in Turkey for 3 years at the time of the 9/11 attacks, and everybody remembers where they were. I was in the press office in the embassy in Ankara watching the television pictures. But of course, the Turkey story is much, much wider than this. At that time, it was just before the Erdogan government. We were working with the Turkish government to make the case and to build the processes for bringing Turkey in due course into the European Union. Regardless of that, Turkey was and is an absolutely central player to the NATO security system, not only because of its ability and willingness to generate military force, military influence, but also because of its geographical location and its reach into those various regions. And of course, at least at that time, there were some quite big unknowns about what Turkey's own geopolitical ambitions were, or are, in the region on the other side of the Caspian. So as Gillian touched on, how times change. We are living in the most extreme period of geopolitical turbulence of my lifetime, with the possible exception of 1989-1991. Everything we thought we knew is in question. So maybe it's time to look again at some of the assumptions that we're working on. So I think what we're going to find out a bit more about in the film is a bit more about the countries of Central Asia. What lies underneath those maps that I described? The big picture maps, just the infrastructure. The maps used by decision makers and their advisors with frankly limited knowledge or experience of the societies that we're talking about. What do the people who live there actually want? Who are they? Why do they want it? What are their values? How do they think about the world? How do they think about us if we're in the West? How are the societies of this vast and diverse region alike? How do they differ from each other? How do they manage conflict? How do they cooperate? How do they want to cooperate? How do we get away from seeing the region as a vast but little-known space in which external great powers do their thing and everybody else has to live with the consequences? How do we get to know more about the region, its people, their wishes, their cultures and their values? Congratulations to the organisers of today's event, particularly the students involved. Great to see you again, Sal. I'm going to hand over, I'm not quite sure who to introduce the film, but thank you.
Shall I switch off the lights? Or?
Yeah, I think before the film, Chris wanted to say a few words.
Absolutely, yeah. So let's ask Chris to come up and tell us. This is basically like asking the chef to come and introduce the meal that we're about to eat. So
I hope it's good. I hope it's a good meal.
Exactly.
That's the thing.
And then we'll
Thank you so much. It's an honor and a privilege to be here in Cambridge and at King's College. And I just want to tell you a bit about how the film was made. In 2015, I met Mohammed Osimi. I was doing some work in Dushanbe. I was training teenagers in video production. These are teens who had aged out of the orphan system and needed skills, and I was there doing a week-long training. And in the middle of the week-long training, we got a call from a woman in Kujan who wanted to come and watch the training, and then said, I have an English school up in Kujan, would you come up and do a couple days up there? And the woman was Osimi. And said, sure, that would be fine. She came down, she was at the training. We jumped in the car to go to Kujan, and from Dushanbe to Kujan, you know that tunnel. It's a great tunnel, isn't it? I'm sure you've been in this tunnel. And you've been in the tunnel as well. It's crazy, yes. They'll tell you the stories later. But on the way out of Dushanbe, there's a beautiful park. And she said, do you mind if we stop and see my father? And I said, well, sure, you know, it's your car. And we stopped and we got out. And she walked me into the park. And we turned a corner. And there was this amazing statue. And it was Muhammad Osimi. And we went back. You will see that in the credits of the film, actually, that thing. It's been moved since this time. But it was there at the time we filmed. And she told me the story on the road up to Kujan, that 8-hour drive. She told me the story about her father. That was 2015. 2016, at the end of 2016, we filmed in Delhi and we filmed in Paris. 2017, we filmed in Tajikistan for about 10 days, and then we were also in Moscow for a few days. And then in 2018, we put the whole film together. And I will tell you, it is, if you've done video, it's a difficult task. To do it in 8 different languages, 7 of which I don't speak, was quite fascinating and difficult. One of the key things, though, is you bring people around you who can do some incredible work. First of all, the Osimi family and the sisters who would guide us and give us footage and give us pictures and all those things. The other thing, and you will notice it in the film, is the beautiful, beautiful music and score. And I'm very pleased that we have the Emmy Award-winning, 2-time Emmy Award-winning composer, director, conductor of the film with us, Jeff Jolly. Jeff, you come up just a second. And this particular score, which you will hear, won an Emmy Award, which is just great. And so, Jeff, we've got a little something for Dr. Tett. I think you've opened your house. We've got something for you, ma'am. It is the score itself, the Emmy Award-winning score. Sir Bristow, we've got a little one. We've got one for you as well, for Sir Bristow. Very good. Thank you very much. And Zalmai, who has brought us all together in this room, and I appreciate it. We've met a couple times via Zoom. We've got this for you as well. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll let you watch the film. The words in the film that Osimi said, we released this on PBS in the United States in 2018. It was on the broadcasting system. It's been used in universities around the United States. We built it in a way for a United States audience. As we look at the words that they said in 2018, which was the first reign of our then president, the words said matched the time. Unfortunately, or fortunately, as you and I spoke earlier, the words match today, and you will hear it, and it is amazing how much it ties to where we are, not only in the United States, but in the world. So with that, thank you so much for having us in your home. This is just a wonderful place. We appreciate it. We hope you enjoy the film. Thank you.